Hi Truthloaders, welcome to the latest in our series of The Truth According To, a series of interviews with various people from around the world on various really important issues. Today we're joined via Skype from North Carolina by Francis de los Reyes, an environmental sanitation activist, a TED Fellow, environmental engineer. Francis, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Ash.
So your mantra is sanitation is a basic human right. Can you just sort of broaden that out and then just tell us what you're trying to do?
Right. So most people think of human rights as, for example, in the U.S., as those that are embodied in the Bill of Rights. You know, the things that we're more familiar with. For example, the right to free speech and so on. But if you really think about the UN, United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's a series of 30 articles, and in Article 25, there is a statement there about the right to an adequate standard of living. And that includes obviously food and water. And what I'm arguing is that sanitation, which is what everybody does, right? We need to dispose of our human waste, of our fecal material. That has to be part of that clause or that article that says there should be an adequate standard of living. If people are defecating openly, and a lot of people in the world are doing that, almost a billion people, estimates vary from zero point 0.9 to 1.1 billion people currently out of the 7.2 billion people in the world. If people are doing that, defecating openly, or if people don't have access to adequate sanitation, and again, around 2.5 billion people in the world don't have access to adequate sanitation. And by that we mean, there's not adequate or enough separation between them and their fecal material. They might have a structure, but they still get contamination from trying to dispose of their human waste. If that is the situation, I'm going to argue that that's not an acceptable standard of living. And so within that context, I'm arguing that adequate sanitation is a basic human right, just as I believe water, access to clean water is a basic human right.
Okay, so where in the world are we talking about this, where people need this basic sanitation that many people, I suppose, in the West are privileged with, if you like?
That's right. Yeah. So the problem is really pronounced in countries in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at the map, pretty much aside from the more developed African, the North African states and also South Africa as a country, most of those countries, sub-Saharan Africa, in India, we still see close to 50% of the population practicing open defecation. Uh, Also, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, some countries in South America. These are the areas where basically there's a correlation between poverty and the lack of access to basic sanitation.
I suppose it's just fair to say for anyone who sort of started watching this subject is pretty gruesome. There's something slightly comedy about it. We're talking about sanitation. We're talking about crap. I'm going to say it's the word crap. It's going to be said a lot in this interview. Um,
Right.
but Francis, can you just tell us a bit more about those figures that you kind of have as top lines? Because you were saying before about the 2.5 billion people around the world who don't have access to sanitation. I mean, what other figures are you working with that kind of make this issue sort of right there in people's faces?
Right. So first, let me talk about the figures and where they come from. Obviously, these are estimates, but the estimates come from UN monitoring program. So there is a what's called the Joint Monitoring Program on Water and Sanitation by the United Nations. So it's called the JMP. And what they do is they collate information from different countries, and each country would have a JMP committee or officer, if you want, and they collate all that. And every few years, they summarize all the data. So the last estimates that we have are from 2013, and these are obviously coming in and incomplete. So the number 2.5 billion comes from that. And the reason we're trying to monitor that, or the UN is trying to monitor that, is because we have what we call the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. And part of the goal for sanitation is to actually have or cut in half the proportion of people who don't have access to sanitation. So that's where the 2.5 billion number is coming from. And then the other number is the almost 1 billion people who practice open defecation, and that's basically doing the business out in the open. You know, well, there's really no structure where you do it in the bushes or near private or public land along government owned railroad tracks, or wherever basically or along river banks. So these are some of the areas where you can see open defecation. Um, if you think about the impact of sanitation on public health, then the impacts include obviously diarrhea, in, and because of contamination of food and water. I mean, if you live basically surrounded by fecal material, it's going to get into your clothing, it's going to get into your hands, it's going to get into your food, and it's going to get into your water. And so when that happens, uh, people are going to get sick. And the figures we have for diarrhea, again, depends on the numbers, but in the talk I gave at TED, it's something like 4,000 um, children basically die every day because of infectious diarrhea that can be traced back to lack of adequate sanitation. So you can do, sorry.
Sorry, I was just sorry to butt in. Those 4,000 children who die every day, is there a continent where they are most likely to die?
Yes, and so again, it's concentrated in South Asia. So we're talking about India, and then we're talking about Africa, sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay. So, I mean, what can we do about this? Because is this, and whose responsibility is this?
So that's the question that people are trying to address. What can we do about this? Um, there are many factors for why the situation is like this today. Number one, sanitation is, if you will, an issue that is lagging behind other issues. Primarily, uh, the sector that I work in, we call this WASH, right? Water, sanitation, and hygiene. And frankly, water, um, access to clean drinking water, has been a priority, and rightly so, right? And it's quite visible if people are dying of thirst, if they don't have the basic access to clean drinking water. That's something that a lot of people can relate to, and a lot of celebrities, a lot of famous people have taken up that cause. So sanitation has taken a back seat, if you will, right? Um, and I believe now is the time, and people are recognizing that we really need to look at sanitation holistically. To me, there are four major factors or issues why sanitation is a hard issue to solve. I mean, you ask about why this has become a problem. Well, the first thing is that we need to make sure that there is an environment, an enabling environment. I'm talking about government, and I'm talking about local rules, regulations, national attention on sanitation. So for the longest time, this has not been a priority. If you are a developing country, if you are a government in a developing country, maybe you're focusing on the economy, direct things that will impact the economy like jobs and so on. Um, and the truth is, it's the marginalized, it's the underrepresented, it's the poor people who are really affected by this issue. And in most of these countries, the poor have a smaller voice in the political process. So that's the first thing, is that we got to have this environment where government is seeing this as a need. The second thing is that we do have a problem with technologies. And by that I mean it's not a a one size fits all approach. There is not one magic technology, one magic bullet that can solve this for everybody in the world. The technology is not going to be cheap. We're going to have to invest in infrastructure, maybe even just for the first cost. Um, and we need to think of technology not just as the toilet. Most people think of it as the toilet, right? And that's part of the problem. In the West, we flush it and we forget it. But we have to think of the whole sanitation chain. And what I was trying to say in my TED talk was that people have to employ that systems thinking of the human user interface, the toilet, to the pit, to how to collect it from the pit, transporting it, to treating it, and to disposal and to reuse. So that's the whole system. And along that whole system, we have to make sure that public health is protected. So it's not just the toilet itself, right? It has to go somewhere. And that material has to be handled and treated. And if we can reuse it as a resource, then that's really the way to go. So that's the second factor. The third factor is that I think we have to make this sustainable. And to make this sustainable, we have to think of sanitation as a business. And this is now a theme that's coming up in my field, sanitation as a business. And the reason for this is that we need to scale it up. And it's going to take a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of money for governments to just do this, or for NGOs or donor organizations to do this. So for this to be sustainable, in my view, it has to be profitable. And that's the only way that it will scale up to the 2.5 billion. And again, we have to look at examples where you have that, the right business models and it's profitable, and you can actually create small scale businesses along the sanitation chain. Now, it may not be possible to recover all the costs, the capital costs, but at least the operational costs should be profitable. And then the fourth element is changing behavior. In some of these countries, it still is quite accepted to go out into the field and do it in the open. A lot of people find great pleasure in that. There are some anecdotal reports that women, some women go together as a group, go out into the fields, and they view that as quality time together. Uh, of course, we also know of other cases where it's a big risk for women to go out, especially at night. They don't want to go out during the day because it's too public, so they try to keep it in, and then at night they go out, and then they're exposed to all these risks, including risks of sexual attacks. So we need to work on all those things. So the first thing was the enabling environment, getting government and officials behind this, working on the technology, and not just technology with respect to the toilet, but the whole sanitation chain. Trying to create opportunities for businesses in sanitation, and then finally working on behavior. So it's quite a complicated problem. It's not just a technical problem, but it's also a social, cultural, political problem. And that's why sanitation is it's very difficult to work on. That's a long answer to your first question. But your second question is, who's to blame? Well, I really don't want to put blame, right? I think there are many actors, many things that we can do. We can think about educating people. In a lot of these areas, the connection between having their fecal material exposed and getting sick is not quite clear. So we need to make sure that people are educated that if you live in these conditions, you're more likely to get sick. Your children are going to get diarrhea. They're going to miss school. They're going to, maybe even die. So we have to make clear that connection. So there's an educational component. And of course, in my TED talk, I was basically making the case that government should make this a priority and we should invest in the infrastructure. So, it's going to take a lot of people working together, but there is a role for government, there is a role for business, there's a role for NGOs and organizations, there's a role for community organizers, and there's a role for people to change their behaviors and basically say that things like open defecation, that's not acceptable. I don't know. That's a very long answer to your question, but I hope that it makes
No, no,
sense.
that's really good. That's really good. I mean, you touched there on sort of who you think is sort of responsible for this. And in the TED Talks, you say it's not necessarily a responsibility of NGOs, but it's responsibility of the governments to sort this out, to spend the money. But as you said just now, it's going to cost a lot of money to put the sanitation system, delivery system in place. If it requires a lot of money, and we're talking about countries who may not have that money, then what is the solution? And also governments who are not willing maybe to put the money up front and put a system in place. What happens then? Because people, I suppose, still having to resort to open defecation, and also, members of their family may die as a result of, sort of catching diseases. I mean, what do we do then?
Right, right. So the argument I'm trying to make is that the problem, it does cost a lot of money, but the problem is that we're looking at it on a very short term basis, right? We are not counting all the benefits. Okay, what governments are seeing because of we're very short term thinking is the money they have to put out. But what they don't see is how do we quantify all the benefits? And if we do that analysis, what it's clear, and these are economists who do this, right? And the World Bank has some figures too, is that for every dollar that we invest in sanitation infrastructure, we get anything from $3 to maybe as high as $34 back. And the reason for that is we are basically benefiting in terms of people not getting sick. So that's less burden on the public health system. People are not losing work days. Kids are not losing school days. So you cut down on absenteeism from work and from school. You basically make people healthier and more productive. You can turn a community into a safer place. You are going to boost things like tourism because nobody wants to go to a place, right, where there are no toilets. So all of those things, if you add those up, you get that those dollars back. So the argument is that it's not so much that there's a lot of money that we have to put up, but if we do this right, we actually are going to get our investments back, many times over. So that is an issue, right? And so my argument is the same way we look at roads or hospitals or any public, or schools, any public infrastructure, because we see the benefits behind this. I think we can make the case that sanitation is the same way, right? And the question is, how do we do this so that we get the most bang for our buck? And that's where the role of appropriate technologies would come in. But I think it requires us to look beyond just the short-term horizon of here are my first costs, right? My other argument is, even if we have to spend for that first cost, the operational cost, the maintenance, has to be profitable. If we can do that, then basically, ideally, we put out some money, and then there's space there for profit to be made. So then we actually encourage small businesses. So in a way, we can look at this also as job creation and creating opportunities for small businesses at the village level, at the community level, or maybe even at the higher middle class business level. So if you look at sanitation as a business, and if you look at the operational aspect of the sanitation chain, I think it's money that's well spent. Um, and
What
again, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what about, I mean, you talked about small business, creating small business sort of infrastructure there. But some people might say, well, if you start creating businesses to solve the problem and not sort of, you're kind of outsourcing it, if you like, you're going to be putting profits before people, and really this is a solution. This is a problem for people that needs to be solved. And then people might think, well, if you've got companies, there's the potential for the system to be abused and the people not to get what they need. I mean, what do you think to that? Because you're talking about sort of companies who go, oh, will make money off it, so they'll be encouraged to do something about it.
Right. I think that's a good point, and we've had that debate also in the West, right? In the U.S., we talked about privatization of water and sewer systems. And I think the one thing that we have to emphasize is that we're doing this for public health. So public health is really the number one reason. So that's the first thing. And so all of these businesses, when we create the business models, we have to say, okay, we've got to make sure that the procedures, for example, for uh, emptying pits or transporting these containers would have to be hygienic. We don't want shortcuts where you have fecal material basically flying all over the place, right, on the roads. And that's what's happening now in some of these um, situations where people don't have the proper equipment, they're doing it by hand. Um, there's not a lot of safeguards there, not a lot of protective equipment. There are examples of municipal or local government-led initiatives where they actually franchise. So an example is Itiquini municipality in South Africa. They've done a really good job of um, of making sure that they support the small-scale pit emptying businesses, and they provide them with training and proper PPE, personal protective equipment, and they support them, with tools and maintenance and so on of their equipment. And there the emphasis is on doing the right procedure. So it's professionalized, right? And it's moving away from the fly-by-night um, businesses that are happening right now in many countries. So if you professionalize that sector, if you provide them with the right training, the right equipment, these are the types of new businesses that I'm thinking of. Right now, there is an informal sector, in particular for pit emptying, and these are the people who have no protective equipment and do it, hand by hand, bucket by bucket, and these are the guys who, you know, get the fecal material from their small containers and dump it into a drum and then roll it down the street, and again they just dump it into the river. So, in the new business models I'm talking about, these are all have to be figured out to make sure that we have these hygienic and sustainable solutions.
So you think there was some kind of sort of regulatory system that needs to be in place as well to monitor those firms who do the work but do it right and according to some kind of international guidelines?
Yes, I do think that businesses have to work within a regulatory framework, especially for something like this, where there's a huge potential for risks to the workers themselves and also the community. Um, we can incorporate that into these new businesses that are again professionalized and more profitable, maybe because they're doing it right. So this is a way you know, to reinvent business. I cited the example of Itiquini municipality in South Africa, where it's a government-private um, partnership that's doing it, and there is some regulatory framework around it. So it's not a free for all, because what's happening right now is pits have to be emptied anyway, but it becomes like a fly-by-night operation where there's no regulations.
Can you tell us a bit about your kind of experiences in the field, sort of where you've gone to and kind of what you've seen and what has been, the most shocking aspects of the problem that you're trying to find a global solution for?
Right. Well, I grew up in the Philippines, Ash, and I spent the first 22 years of my life in the Philippines, and of course, it's doing a little bit better now economically, but it was and it still is a developing country. And so growing up, I had relatives who had pit latrines, and I recall, using pit latrines as a child, and then we would go out to the barrios in college, and I practiced open defecation one time, one whole week when there was no toilet in that particular house I stayed in. Um, then, of course, I moved to the U.S. Um, and but still, I go back to the Philippines. I'm quite active. I have worked with an NGO there, and so I see poverty. I see slums. In our current work, we have partnerships in South Africa. We have partnerships in India, and also research going on in Malawi. And those are the areas where we try to go to the informal settlements. And in these areas, it's a mix, right? I mean, you can still see open defecation, but for the most part, it's really pit latrines, and they might have a superstructure, where you have a small outhouse, if you will, in a pit, and it just varies. Um, and what we do is we try to study the situation. We actually try to characterize the pit contents, because if we're trying to optimize how to collect those, we really have to go deep into it, if you will, right? So we actually uh, test the physical characteristics of the pit contents using instruments like a penetrometer. We talk to people, see what their practices are like. Um, so we really get our hands dirty. As far as shocking, um, after a while, it's not too bad. I mean, after a while, you do get used to this kind of work. It's dirty work, but somebody's got to do it. Um,
Do you have
I
to have a
think.
bit of, do you have to have a sense of humor to do this?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think I think you have to just enjoy um, solving the problem, trying to solve the problem. I think we're engineers, and so my team, and we have a very small team. We are not queasy people. It takes a lot to to shock us, and we've seen almost everything. Um, you know, I do have a collection of photos which I don't know that people would like to see. I just keep them, and once in a while I show it to class. Just with fair warning. Um, but yeah, you gotta have a sense of humor about these things. And what's interesting is that when we go to sites like we were in Malawi at this informal settlement, and every time we go in there, we put on our protective gear, and we look like we're we got gloves on, we got face masks on, we got this machine that looks high tech, and children come to us and sort of gather around us and watch what we're doing. And of course, we have to tell them, okay, stay away because we're trying to do this experiment. We're trying to analyze your pit latrine. But yeah, you just have to have a sense of humor about this. A lot of people I talk to find it fascinating. I don't know how many people are turned off when I tell them that I open up pits and look at fecal material. Um, no, it's just part of the job, I guess.
Are you allowed at dinner tables?
I'm sorry.
Are you allowed at dinner tables to talk? If you start talking about this at the dinner table,
I've given talks, luncheon talks, and I just sort of say, look, guys, this is the situation. Usually it's after lunch, so they just ate, and I'm sort of like the speaker, and I say, uh, I might show you a few pictures. You can close your eyes if you want to. But yeah, in conferences, we have these, community of researchers from all over the world, and we have this fecal sludge management conference, and we eat and we talk about crap.
um, I just want to go back to the kind of the work that you're doing. So you work in a small team. Um, you're obviously extremely dedicated to the cause, but there must be moments where you just become frustrated, or members of your team become frustrated, and you must say, why can't we just do this, or why can't we do that? I mean, are there cases like that? Do you come in on a Monday and you're like, oh, I wish we could just do this?
Well, I think we're researchers um, and engineers, and so it's really problem solvers. And with research, it's always frustrating sometimes. Um, the thing with this particular project is that it's just not science research or technology development. It really is going out to the field and talking to people. Um, uh, so yeah, it can be frustrating, but we're sort of used to it. We're sort of used to in the lab. And I also do, I have my own research group, and this is just one of the research areas that I work in. And this work is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I should really acknowledge them for putting this issue on the forefront and funding a lot of research across the globe. So, uh, we use that research money to develop the technology, and yeah, some days we just say, okay, this is tough. Uh, but every time you try to be optimistic about it and say, okay, let's try this idea, let's try that idea. Uh, it's part of the research process. Um, you, I, I don't know if it came across in the TED talk, but it comes from also something very personal, right? You think about the world and you say, this is not right, and what can I do to change the situation? So you balance that, the why you're doing it with the daily work and the actual work in the field, and you can't just be overwhelmed because then you'll be ineffective. You know, you just have to go there and then take a shower afterwards, have a beer, discuss it, and do it again the next day.
What kind of technology is out there? Kind of like new technology that could help get to where you want it to be? Because I'd imagine it's not just a case of going into a community that doesn't have sanitation, going, right, here's some toilets, right, problem solved.
Exactly. I think a lot of the previous work by well-meaning NGOs was, okay, let's provide a toilet. And when they do that in the absence of, or without taking into consideration the culture of the people or educating the people or having the community be involved in decision making, then chances are that's going to be a failure. And we have instances of, okay, here's a nice looking toilet. It's even nicer than the house. And guess what? The people are using that as storage, right? Because you can lock it, it's concrete, it's safe, it stays dry, you can put your valuable grain and equipment and tools in there. So it's not being used as a toilet. So I think, like I said before, technology is one aspect of it. But in that area, the big improvement in the last few years has been the infusion of funds, research funding from the Gates Foundation, for example. And what they've done is they've issued a challenge, the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, and say, okay, how do we reinvent the toilet? Um, because the old model of having flush toilets powered by water, having sewer lines, having a centralized wastewater treatment plant, um, that whole model will not work in many of these countries. It's too expensive, it's wasteful of water, and the water may not be available at all. Um, so what they've um, asked is for the researchers to come up with toilets that can potentially reuse the nutrients, reuse the energy, reuse the water if water is to be used in their technologies, and also at a cost. And this is the big hurdle of less than 5 cents per user per day. So that's the challenge that they put out, and they funded a lot of groups around the world. And right now, there's a lot of these studies going on, ranging from the very low tech, if you will, maybe things like augers that dry them and compost the wastes for reuse as fertilizer, to more high tech approaches where you have things like solar panels that are fueling a particular process, to converting it to biochar, to so pyrolysis type approaches, to using plasma as a way of doing it. So the uh, the technology is still you know, being researched on, and that's something that maybe 10, 20 years down the road. I think the challenge is, what do we do now? You know, between now and when these new toilets can be really, um, ready, what do we do now? Because we're talking again about the 2.5 billion who don't have access to sanitation. And that's where you start thinking about what do they have now and how we can improve that and how we can, retrofit, if you will, the system so we can add things on the sanitation chain along that whole spectrum so we can make what's going on right now more hygienic and more sustainable. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you're thinking about new technologies, you're thinking about the specific inventions, if you like, that have
Right.
been created. I mean, from what you know, and those places that need this sanitation. I suppose could you describe more about what a piece of equipment would be that is used there?
Right. So let me give you an example. And this one is from the Climate Foundation. I'm working with a few other universities. What they're doing is pyrolysis, meaning creating biochar by not the total combustion, but partial combustion of the fecal material. And you do that to inactivate the pathogens, and you do that to create biochar, which can be now used as an additive, right? A soil additive to improve the fertility of soils. So what they're trying to develop is this process, the downstream process of, having the fecal material come in, and that can come in from a variety of toilet technologies. So, they're not looking at the upstream process. They're looking at, okay, now we have the fecal material collected. How do we now turn this into biochar in a small scale or smaller scale pyrolysis facility? And of course, that's going to cost some money. But then what are the economics of it? So that's one technology. There are other technologies. Um, let me see. Again, the urine diverting toilets that I talked about in the TED talk, where you separate the urine from the fecal material, and when you do that, you're separating out basically 50% of the phosphorus and 80% of the nitrogen, which is in the urine fraction. And from there, you can now start thinking about how do I recover those nutrients, the nitrogen and the phosphorus. On the fecal material side, how can I convert this? How can I use the energy from fecal material? Maybe I can digest that anaerobically, create methane out of it. So those are the types of things, right? On the human interface side, different groups around the world are working on different technologies. So, for example, waterless toilets, uh, a nanomembrane toilet where you're using advanced materials that will automatically separate the urine from the fecal material. Those types of things. So lots of different technologies are being researched on now. A lot of them may not be cost effective right now, but like I said, maybe 10, 20 years into the future, those costs will come down and they may be implementable in the field. But right now, that's the big challenge, is how to bring the costs down, how to make the technologies robust. We're going to put these in areas where uh, there's not going to be a lot of technical support maybe, or there are issues in terms of the community. So we have to make sure that these are appropriate. And so we still have a long way to go. But hopefully with continued work by these folks and funding from different organizations, we can continue the work.
Is this something that maybe sort of like the new generation can help with? Because I've seen sort of various competitions
Right.
and crowdfunding projects which are kind of towards this area. So, I mean, do you think there should be more people sort of trying to pitch in their ideas of technologies of the future?
Oh, sure. I think so. I think, and I'm coming here from the more traditional wastewater treatment engineering background. So my training is actually in the traditional, uh, paradigm of, let's flush the toilet, let's design the sewer systems, let's take them to a centralized treatment plant. And we've had a lot of success with that as an industry. We've protected surface water very well. But again, that will not be the solution for many of these countries. So having more people, having more minds, having the young people even, think about it, uh, is just good, right? Because I think, even the Reinvent the Toilet challenge, we have a lot of people who wouldn't even think about it, but they were challenged by the Gates Foundation and said, okay, if you have a new idea, we'll fund you. And that has brought a lot more actors into the field. So including us, I mean, we actually have funding from the Gates Foundation, and without that funding, we wouldn't be able to do our work. So I think a lot of people coming in, a lot of ideas. We just have to be open to all kinds of ideas in the material sciences, in the physical, biological, chemical sciences, um, even in the context of um, you know um, the web and applications or apps. It may be possible to control some of these things using cell phone apps, those kinds of things. As an example, our work on the pit emptying technology was the product of a design class here at North Carolina State University. We had one of my co-professors, one of my colleagues, he and I said, okay, let's put together the Gates Foundation challenges as the driving force behind the design class. And the technology actually came from one of the students, Tate Rogers, and the basic idea came from him, and that's the basis of the proposal we wrote to the Gates Foundation. So Tate is one of those young people who was a senior then in college doing environmental engineering. And then because of that funding, he went on and did the master's on that same project. And now he's one of the people working with me on this research project. So I think we need the energy, we need the ideas of young people. And most of all, we need awareness from the younger generation. I think if people know about these numbers we talked about, right, the 2.5 billion, the 1 billion people who defecate openly, I think if people know about this, there'll be pressure, to do something about this. And I think we need the energies of the younger generation, because this is basically not the type of world I'm sure that they want to live in. This is not the world that they want to see for them and for their children.
Thanks, Francis. And can you just, I suppose, finally, just tell us where we can find out more about your research?
Oh, okay. Well, our research is on the website. So we have see if I remember the website. It's it's pit
Okay.
excavator. So we call our technology the excavator, EXCREVATOR. So pit excavator dot wordpress dot ncsu dot edu. But there are other work being done by other people all over the world. We're just one group that's working on it, and I was very fortunate to have that TED talk and highlight the issue. But to be frank, there are lots of people who've been doing this for a long, long time. So, and NGOs that have been really being at the forefront of this issue. So, uh, there's the Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor, or WASUP. There's um, Water for People has been involved. OpenDefecation.org. The Water Sanitation Council, Water Supply and Sanitation Council, or WSSC. There are several groups, and of course the UN groups. And of course, I belong to this alliance called the Sustainable Sanitation Alliance, or SUSANA, which is a forum for all of us who are working in this area, particularly on sanitation. So people, if people are interested, they can just Google and look at these organizations. They can Google my name and look at the links. Um, yeah, it would be great for people to really be aware of what's going on in sanitation.
Francis, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate you talking us today. We're going to have some more interviews later this week, so keep on checking out the channel and our Twitter. Send us any questions you want us to ask at Truthloader, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.